Hey, everybody. I hope that you're doing as well as possible under these circumstances. I am doing well and coming to you from the back bedroom of my apartment rather than from our classroom, which is where I would certainly rather be discussing Augustine with you all. I wish I was there to have these conversations live, but we're going to do the best that we can under these circumstances. So, I've posted for you some notes regarding Augustine, and we talked about the context of this text, City of God. And I mentioned in the notes that the history, the context of what's going on here is incredibly important. He's referring specifically to, or I should say, responding specifically to a historical incident, which was the invasion of Rome by Visigoths, and the fact that Rome had adopted Christianity as its state religion just about 100 years earlier. And so after this horrible event, or horrible string of events, has taken place, the people of Rome, of the Roman Empire, are wondering whether or not they made a big mistake. And if this Christian God was so powerful, why would it allow something like this to happen? And they're wondering whether or not they made a mistake by adopting Christianity and turning their backs on the gods that they had worshipped for a long time. In chapters 1 through 7 of this text, Augustine is talking about the normal traditions or practices that took place when an army would invade a city. And he's saying that under these circumstances, that this time was different, that the army that invaded Rome acted differently than other armies normally do when they're invading a city. And he's saying that this was different. It wasn't as bad as it normally is. So basically, even though God allowed this to happen, that it wasn't as bad as it might have been otherwise. The fact that the Visigoths, those were the people who invaded Rome, who sacked Rome, that the Visigoths had given quarter or given refuge to Romans inside Christian churches, and that this is unheard of. This doesn't normally happen in warfare. So he writes, all the spoiling which Rome was exposed, all the slaughter, plundering, burning, and misery, was the result of the custom of war. But what was novel was that the savage barbarians showed themselves so gentle that the largest churches were chosen and set apart for the purpose of being filled with the people to whom quarter was given. In other words, people were led into these churches and were given refuge. And he goes on, and that none of them were slain, from them, as in the churches, from them none forcibly dragged, that into them many were led by their relenting enemies to be set at liberty, and that from them none were led into slavery by merciless foes. So again, he's saying that though these horrible things happened, it wasn't as bad as it might have otherwise been. And then he continues, whoever does not see that this is to be attributed to the name of Christ and to be the Christian temper is blind. Whoever sees this and gives no praise is ungrateful. Whoever hinders anyone from praising it is mad. So again, things weren't as bad here as they might have been. So that's the first thing that he's talking about in this text. So that's chapters 1 through 7. He's talking about these things. And then with chapter 8, he addresses the question of why would God spare wicked people and punish good people? So he answers this question in several ways. First off, he says that bad things happen to good people to give them the gift of humility. So this gift of humility, according to Augustine, should give us the chance to look inside ourselves to see if we've truly been good, or what we should do to perhaps move closer to God. So remember, going back to our notes, Augustine sees these two worlds the city of God and the city of man, existing next to each other and existing within our souls. So through our actions, we're always either moving towards the city of God or back towards the city of man. And everything that we can do that's godly or positive moves us closer or more into the city of God. But ultimately, we always have sort of one foot in each city. The second is that he says, and this is an interesting one, I think, that if God were to spare people physical pain, then we would come to believe that that's all that God is good for. And then third, and this is sort of an important point here, and it has to do with grace. Remember, grace, according to Augustine, is God's gift of goodness. So because of original sin, this is in our notes that I uploaded, because of original sin, we have no goodness within ourselves. So any goodness that we have is through God's grace. And one form of God's grace, according to Augustine, and this is how he answers this question, the ultimate answer to this question, is that physical pain is a type of grace from God. That when you experience physical pain, you're basically given two different options. You can be in pain and sort of say, to heck with all this religiosity, to heck with this God, all that stuff. I can't believe I'm going through this pain, and sort of push God away and be angry about it, and therefore pushing yourself out of the city of God and back into the city of man. That's one option. Or another option, he's saying, is to accept the pain and to understand that it's part of God's grace, and to allow it to move you closer into the city of God. Something which I'm sure for most humans would be pretty difficult. But what we see here in this next passage, which I'm about to read, is the justification for a lot of really horrible things that the Catholic Church did. And then not just the Catholic Church, but other Protestants had done things like witch trials and inquisitions, the torturing of thousands and thousands of people to try to get them to convert to Christianity. So the idea that when you're inflicting pain on somebody, that what you're doing is actually part of God's grace is inspired by this passage right here. This is a really important one. He writes, "Though exposed to the same anguish, virtue and vice are not the same thing. For as the same fire causes gold to glow brightly and chaff to smoke, and under the same flail, as in beating, under the same flail the straw is beaten small, while the grain is cleansed. And as the lees are not mixed with the oil, though squeezed out of the vat by the same pressure, so the same violence of affliction proves, purges, clarifies the good, but damns, ruins, exterminates the wicked. So material a difference does it make, not what ills are suffered, but what kind of man suffers them. For stirred up with the same movement, mud exhales a horrible stench, and ointment emits a fragrant odor." So again, he's saying that people who are virtuous, who are leaning towards the city of God, when they experience physical pain, they will allow that pain, or they'll see that pain as part of God's grace, and that they'll allow that pain to help them move closer into the city of God. They'll accept it. And those who don't are moving, they're basically turning their back on God's grace.